Well, good morning. Thank you for joining the webinar today. I hope you can see on your screens, this is the Emergency Impact Aid for Displaced Students program, and we're also going to talk this morning about the Assistance for Homeless Youth program. I am Marguerite Reese. I'm the Federal Policy Liaison for the California Department of Education, and I'm helping to coordinate all of these various emergency response and funding opportunities from the U.S. Department of Education for the California Department of Education. My contact information is on the final slide of this presentation. We've also created, and this will be shared on a subsequent slide, an email inbox at CDE for any emergency-related funding or otherwise questions, and it's simply emergency services, plural, at cde.ca.gov. And so if you have any type of even random question related to this program or not, the account is managed by staff from multiple divisions and offices within CDE, so from funding, from grants management, facilities. There are a lot of real people that look at that email inbox, and we will get back to you just as soon as we can with any type of support. I'm joined today by my colleague Leanne Wheeler, who is CDE's homeless liaison, among many other great things, and she's going to help describe the program and assistance for homeless youth.
Good morning.
We're so glad she could be here today. All right, so we're just going to get started. If you have questions during the webinar this morning, please enter them into the sort of Q&A portion of your screen. You should see it to the right. And if I can, I'll answer your questions verbally during the webinar, and then I'll take some time at the end, certainly to go through and do my best to respond to those questions. The last thing I'll say is that this webinar is being recorded today. We're going to get it posted as soon as we can on our website dedicated to this program and funding opportunity. And if you like, you can download these slides right now from your web browser. So on sort of your WebEx Event Center window that's open, if you go to, they just showed me how to do this, let's see, File, I believe it's Transfer, or is it Share? No, it's File, Transfer, and then you should be able to download the slides from there. As I mentioned, we're going to post the slides and the recording of the webinar to our webpage. If you still can't get the slides and still want them, just email emergencyservices@cde.ca.gov and we'll send you the slides because we want you to have this information. All right, so here we go. So Emergency Impact Aid, or EIA, is a program authorized by Congress but will be awarded through the U.S. Department of Education, or ED, to eligible SEAs, or state education agencies, on the basis of quarterly counts of displaced students. So eligible state educational agencies are those states that were impacted by the multiple hurricanes that hit our East Coast in 2017, as well as the California wildfires. In California, the definition of displaced student will be important, and I'll talk about that on a later slide. So SEAs, which in this case is the CDE, will provide payments to eligible LEAs to assist with the cost of education for students who are displaced by a covered disaster or emergency during the 2017-18 school year and who were enrolled in public schools, including charter schools, and non-public or private schools. So eligible recipients include LEAs, school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools, as well as non-public schools and private schools. So if you were unfortunately in an area of the state that was hit hard by the wildfires or subsequent events like mudslides, there have been several funding opportunities, including Project Serve. That application window has closed, but we're happy to say that for the folks that applied related to the October wildfires and incident, California received $2 million to support those districts that put in requests. And then Restart is a different funding stream. And we're also proud to say that we received over $14 million to support both LEA and state-level activities to support the districts that were impacted by the wildfires. Just a heads up that if for some reason you missed the Restart application, California and other states have been allowed to do second or third Restart applications if there are additional identified needs. So later this month, CDE will be advertising and promoting a second application window for the Restart program. So if you missed it the first time around, there's going to be a second opportunity for you there. But just know that if you applied for Project Serve and or Restart, you are still eligible to apply for Emergency Impact Aid. Okay, so as I mentioned, the funding was authorized by Congress, but will be available to state education agencies for LEAs and non-public and private schools through the U.S. Department of Education. In total, Congress allocated up to $2.5 billion for two programs, the Restart, which I previously mentioned, and then this program that we're here for today, the Temporary Emergency Impact Aid for Displaced Students Program, or EIA for short. So on behalf of impacted LEAs, non-public and private schools, the California Department of Education is applying for Emergency Impact Aid and the Assistance for Homeless Children and Youth funding from the U.S. Department of Education. And for those folks that are on the phone today, for our homeless youth, don't worry, I'll get to your slides near the second half of the presentation. So I'm going to go through some of the timelines. All of this information is available on our website. Many of the timelines were set by the enabling legislation authorized by Congress. And so as much as we would like to give you more time to fill out these applications, and we have asked for an extension, we have been told no. And the reason that the answer is no is because the way the statute was written. So California and interested LEAs who want to apply for Emergency Impact Aid have to commit their LEA application and send it to the web address I mentioned, emergencyservices@cde.ca.gov. The application, I think, is fairly straightforward. I'll talk about it in just a moment, but we're trying to get the bare minimum information so you can complete it quickly. Now, there's a very important component for our colleagues that have been impacted in non-public and private schools. So if you have any non-public or private schools within your LEA's geographic location that had displaced students and are interested in applying for Emergency Impact Aid, you, the LEA, then must include the applications from non-public schools when you turn in your LEA application to CDE. They'll be essentially on two sheets of paper, so one for the LEA and one for the non-public schools, but the LEA has the responsibility to collect and submit the forms from non-public or private schools and turn them in on their behalf. Again, this is a process that was established by Congress, and there's just not a lot of flexibility here. The good news is, if you want to call it that, is that states have the ability to send revised application because we know that we're at the end of the school year. A lot of your enrollment counts that we'll need for the application just won't be finalized until late June for most of us as we're closing out the school year. And so, yes, LEAs, you have to turn in, if you're interested, the application by May 24th, but we're going to ask you for a revised application in late June, June 25th. So as you settle your final numbers, you're going to resubmit an application to us in late June. So for our colleagues in non-public and private schools, you certainly are eligible to apply for this grant. We're asking that you please turn in your forms by May 21st to the LEA where your non-public or private school is geographically located. So the LEA has some time to compile the information provided by the non-public or private schools in the area. Non-public schools have to submit their application to the LEAs, this first bullet indicates, but there's also a form that parents of non-public school students need to fill out. And so the parents of non-public school students need to fill out the applicable application. They need to turn that into their non-public school, and then the non-public school needs to turn in that application to their LEA in which they're geographically located. So it's about 3 steps. If you have questions, feel free to email us, and again, all of this information is on our website. Just like the revised process in June for LEAs, the same is true For non-public schools, we're asking that by June 18th, non-public schools submit their revised applications to the LEAs, again by June 18th. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, if you're a parent or a guardian of a non-public or school student and were displaced by the wildfires, you have to fill out the parent application and turn it into your non-public school. And please do not turn it into the CDE. Okay, so the payments that are available under the Emergency Impact Aid are $9,000 for each displaced student who is an English learner, $10,000 for each displaced student who is a child with a disability, $8,500 for each displaced student who is not reported as a child with a disability or an English learner. And the payments received must be used for expenses for this school year that we're currently in, the 2017-18 school year. So for the payments to non-public private schools, and I'm just going to read this information verbatim, while the U.S. Department of Education, to their credit, is trying to get as much information out as possible, I have just essentially reiterated what the U.S. Department of Education has said so that we're all sharing the same information. So the total amount of a payment on behalf of a displaced student enrolled in a non-public school may not exceed the lesser of the per pupil amounts or the cost of tuition, I should say fees, at the non-public school for the 2017-18 school year. I often get the question when I'm working with non-public or private schools that does the acceptance of these funds constitute, I believe, a federal payment? The answer is yes. So you will be accepting federal funds, and I believe that changes your status somewhat. So just be aware that if you apply for and receive these funds, there is that essentially consequence. And again, I'll read this verbatim because this is what came from the U.S. Department of Education. If parents have submitted applications on behalf of displaced students who are attending eligible non-public schools, LEAs will make payments to accounts at the non-public schools on behalf of those students. The remainder of the funds LEAs received will be used to provide educational services for displaced students attending their public schools. We also are aware that the U.S. Department of Education is currently developing more information on their website, including a frequently asked questions, and I imagine that this information will be more fleshed out as time goes on. So this is a really important part. I apologize that the font is a little bit small, but I wanted to include the exact definition of a displaced student. So a student who is enrolled in an elementary school or secondary school other than the school that the student was enrolled in or was eligible to be enrolled in on the date that is 1 week prior to the date that the major disaster or emergency was declared for the area, because such student resides or resided on the date that is 1 week prior to the date of that major disaster or emergency was declared for the area, in an area for which a major disaster or emergency was declared by the President in accordance with Section 401 or 501, respectively, of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act related to a covered disaster or emergency. Now, in full disclosure, when I first read this displaced student definition, I wasn't really sure what it meant. After reading through it several times and talking to some of our attorneys, I think it's best explained through an example. And so if you are a school district or an LEA and you had a student enrolled in District A before the wildfires, let's say, started in October. As a result of the wildfires, a child disenrolled from District A and subsequently enrolled in District B. In this example, District B is eligible to apply for this funding opportunity, Emergency Impact Aid, but District A is not. So District B essentially accepted or enrolled the displaced student, so they are eligible to receive Emergency Impact Aid. Now, here's another example that I think is also helpful. So again, talking about School District A, School 1. Student was enrolled in District A, School 1 prior to the emergency. The same student who was enrolled due to the wildfires changed schools and instead enrolled still in District A, but in School 2. So a different school site within the same district. District A is able to apply for emergency impact aid for that student. Even though they're in the same district, they enrolled in a different school within the district. So you're able to count that child as a displaced student for the purposes of this application. So I hope that example is helpful as you think about if you're able to apply for this funding.
Marguerite, can I add one thing?
Sure.
I think it's important to indicate that a displaced student doesn't necessarily have to be a homeless student. So it's just the fact that you define a displaced student as changing schools due to the fires or the natural disasters. So later on we will talk about the homeless piece, but a displaced student that has nothing to do with their nighttime residency.
Okay, thanks, Leanne. All right, so we're shifting gears a little bit for the Assistance for Homeless and Youth program. These are two separate programs, but they're essentially being released or opened up at the same time by the U.S. Department of Education. They do have different requirements in terms of how the funding is spent and for what duration or how long you can spend the money, but in an effort by CDE to try and make your lives easier, we have created our application for EIA to be inclusive of homeless youth. So essentially, at the district or non-public school level, excuse me, this only applies to LEAs. You only have to fill out one application for your displaced students and your homeless youth impacted by the wildfires. If you have students that fall in both categories, you will have different spending requirements, but we wanted to at least try and make it a little bit more straightforward with you and have a single application. Okay, so under the Assistance for Homeless Children Youth program, Congress has appropriated $25 million for LEAs to address the needs of homeless students displaced by a covered disaster or emergency. The U.S. Department of Education will award funds to SEAs, which in our case is the CDE, which will then award subgrants to LEAs on the basis of demonstrated need and the number of homeless children and youth enrolled as a result of displacement by a covered disaster or emergency. And what they mean by a covered disaster or emergency is if your county had a declared state of emergency due to the wildfires or subsequent events like mudslides, then that is considered in this instance a covered disaster or emergency. I've heard from some of our colleagues in Northern California who experienced the wildfires several years ago, I believe in 2015, and there were some flooding instances throughout the state. Unfortunately, for the purposes of both of these grants, we're only talking about the wildfires and mudslides of October and December of 2015 or 2017, where you had a declared state of emergency. Again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to give me a call. So LEAs will use the funds awarded under this program to support activities that are allowable under Section 723 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And a list of these 16 authorized activities is available through this web link, and Leanne will just give a couple examples.
So a couple examples would be that you could use this funding for transportation, for school supplies, if students are having some mental health issues or counseling is needed, you can use this McKinney-Vento or these Assistance for Homeless Children and Youth funds for those kind of things, including tracking of students, or tutoring, getting them caught up from the classes or class time that they missed.
Thank you. Okay, so again, if you have any questions related to either program, but certainly for the Assistance for Homeless Children Youth program, we're lucky to have Leanne here with us today, so send us any questions through the Q&A if you've got them, but also feel free to send questions to the Emergency Services account. All right, so here's a list of web resources. So there is some limited information on the U.S. Department of Education's webpage. CDE has created our own webpage, most of which includes the information from this webinar. This is where the webinar slides and recording will be posted, and there's also links to all of the various applications that you will need if you're interested in applying for this funding. All right, I just want to mention, because often there's confusion about the available funding opportunities. ADA credit during periods of emergency, Part 1. This is only for LEAs, and they're also known sort of in the field as the J13 waiver. I just want to briefly describe this process in case you haven't already utilized it. So Management Advisory 9001 provides instructions on how to claim average daily attendance and instructional time credit for days on which schools are forced to close or days when schools are open but attendance is reduced because of emergency conditions. Applications for lost instructional time and lost average daily attendance does not have to be made immediately. And so frankly, although the October and December events were many months ago, you know, we frankly encouraged LEAs to hold off and submit their requests a little bit later in case there were subsequent events or if you just needed more time to fill out your forms. And that's essentially what that last bullet says. So we suggested that you waited before filling out the J13A request to avoid having to fill out multiple requests for the same event for the same fiscal year. If you have questions regarding the J13 process, here are the two staff who work on these and can answer pretty much any question that you throw at them if you have more questions about this process. So the J13A waiver process is different than this one, but if your school was closed or impacted at all during the wildfires, we want to make sure that you take advantage of this opportunity. Okay, so here's my contact information. Again, I'll be helping to coordinate the grant with some of my colleagues here at CDE. So look forward to working with you and receiving your applications. So I've received a handful of questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them for us today. So here we go. All right, so here's a question about the example for how would a displaced student sort of qualify. So the question is, what about if the school district had to close a school site temporarily? For example, District A, School 3, for, I'm assuming a period of time, all students went to District A, Schools 1 and 2. You know, this is something I'll have to clarify with the U.S. Department of Education. I'm not sure because it's on a temporary basis, and my initial reading is that this is for students who were displaced somewhat permanently for a longer period of time, but don't take that as my definitive answer. I will check with the U.S. Department of Education and see if they can provide guidance on that type of question, and we'll post those questions and responses on our webpage as soon as we get a response, because it's a good one, and I'm sure you're not the only person that has that question. Okay, here's a question. For non-public schools where a charter school pays for services at the non-public school, does the charter school submit the forms? It would depend on where the child is enrolled. So the school where the child is enrolled, be it the non-public school if they're enrolled there or if they're enrolled in the charter school. I imagine they're enrolled in the charter school but receive services from the non-public school, if that's what you're describing. Then in that example, it would be the charter school that would apply and send in the form.
It's always the LEA. The non-public schools can't submit the application. They submit it to the LEA, and the LEA submits the application.
Yeah.
So that's important to note.
Okay, let's see. So here's a question. It says, I have several students who were forced out of their homes in the 2017 school year due to floods. They continue to attend our school, but were placed in temporary shelter, and we had to ask the next school district to help with transportation to our school. Do they qualify? As I mentioned, unfortunately, the authorizing language for emergency impact aid is pretty specific in that the displacements have to be related to the California wildfires of 2017 and the hurricane. So for example, if your district received a student or enrolled a student who was displaced from the hurricanes in Puerto Rico, you can count that displaced student. They don't have to be a student just displaced by the wildfires. I'm not sure which floods you're referring to, because unfortunately we've had quite a bit of flooding this year, but they can only be related to the hurricanes and the California wildfires of 2017. The mudslides that took place primarily in Santa Barbara County sort of as a consequence of the wildfires or as a result, and had declared states of emergency, those are also eligible to apply.
That's what I was saying, is if you're referring to the floods as being the mudslides that happened in Southern California or in Santa Barbara area, you would indicate that those kids, if you're talking about the mudslides and they were placed in a shelter, you can apply for the homeless assistance aid there, not the displaced, because they're not displaced, they didn't move schools or change schools, but they were homeless due to the mudslides, then they would qualify for the homeless assistance funding.
Okay, the next couple questions are related to basically how can I get the slides and how quickly. So if you'd like, just send an email right now to Emergency Services, and as soon as I get back to my desk, I'll send you a copy. It'll probably take us 24 hours to get the slides posted on our website, although I've put it through an expedited process and we hope to get them up as soon as possible. But probably the fastest way is just to email me. Our wonderful tech support person has left the room, so the way that I thought you could download the slides, I don't have a good person here to explain it. So, again, if you want the slides, send me an email at Emergency Services and we'll get them to you right away as soon as I get back to my desk. And then I see one more question. Is transportation assistance under the McKinney-Vento Act up to each school district's discretion as how far they will provide this type of aid? I'm going to let Leanne try and tackle that one.
Well, under McKinney-Vento, normal transportation is to and from their school of origin. There isn't anything in the law that talks about how far or how long the student is in commuting mode. It's basically, transportation or school of origin is determined if it's in the best interest of the student. So it's not how far they are from the school of origin or how long it's in the best interest. You can consider that, but it is at the school's discretion and it is parent requested and determined. I hope that helps.
All right, a couple more questions that have come in. They're great. Please keep sending them if you have more. Let's see, a question is, I want to clarify, is this K-12 schools only? Yes. So, for example, if you are a high school district, you're eligible to apply. If you're an elementary-only district, you're eligible to apply. If you're a unified district, you're eligible to apply. If you're a county office, you're eligible to apply. If you're a charter school, you can apply. This question may be related to early education or preschool. If you are a school district that runs preschool or early education programs and or you have one of CDE's contracts for early education programs, you are eligible to apply, but only on behalf of your K-12 students. This does include TK, but not, for example, the California State Preschool Program or other CDE contracted preschool programs. Unfortunately, it's K-12 or TK-12. I see a follow-up related to the question of students displaced by the floods, clarifying that it was Lake County. As long as it falls within the October or December declared state of emergencies related to the wildfires and subsequent events, I believe they should be eligible. If you still have questions, feel free to email me and we can work on that. What is a circumstance in which a county office would apply? A circumstance in which a county office would apply is if you run your own schools and you had students displaced, say, from a continuation high school that you run. If you had students displaced from your county office-run schools, then you would be eligible to apply as a county office of ed. All right, next question. A school is only eligible to apply if, as a district, we receive students who had to move districts due to the wildfires. sort of. So yes, if you received students who had to move districts due to the wildfires or hurricanes, so if you received a child who relocated from, say, Florida due to the hurricanes or Puerto Rico, those students would also be considered displaced. But also recall the example I gave earlier, where a student is enrolled in District A, School 1. They were displaced because of the fires, but still stayed within the district, and after the fires enrolled still in District A, but in School 2, you then could count that child as a displaced student, and they would be eligible for your application for the emergency impact aid. Okay, so we'll hang on the line for 3-4 more minutes. So if you have more questions, please type them in. The one that I couldn't answer today, I will work with the U.S. Department of Education and submit that or include that on our CDE webpage so we can give you that information. Thank you so much for participating today. And if we could ask one thing of you as you very quickly turn around these applications is that please tell your colleagues from other, neighboring districts or other parts of the state or other homeless youth coordinators or your colleagues that work in non-public or private schools. I think Congress and the U.S. Department of Education really want LEAs and non-public and private schools to get this funding, but we need you to apply for it. And again, I wish there was a longer application window, but if you could please help us spread the word. We want to help you apply for these funds, so please turn in as many applications as you can.
Could you repeat what you said about the county office application?
Sure. So the question we got earlier is what would be a circumstance in which a county office would apply? So essentially you're only applying for the emergency impact aid on behalf of your displaced students. And so if you are a county office that runs your own schools, for example, a continuation high school, and you had students enrolled in your county office of education run school that met the definition of displaced student, then you could apply on behalf of those students displaced by the wildfires.
Marguerite, I have a question. If a LEA misses the deadline for May 24th to submit their application, can they send in an application for June 25th?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how, we would love to do that in CD, but I'm not sure if the U.S. Department of Education would accept that. So that's another question I need to pose to the U.S. Department of Education and see if they will allow for essentially late submittals after the May deadline. That is a good question. Thanks, Leanne.
I think the important piece of this is it's not just students that were displaced or homeless due to our wildfires and or our mudslides that have happened. I know that we have received a lot of kids from the hurricanes from Florida and from Texas. So it's really important that school districts go back and look and see if these kids were enrolled in your school districts at that time based on being displaced due to the hurricanes. Important note to make.
Yeah. All right, so we'll give you about 2 more minutes for any additional questions, and then we'll sign off today and start sending you slides if you've asked for them through our emergency services account. All right, let's see. So hearing no more questions, we just want to thank you again for joining us today. We'll have those slides posted as soon as possible. Send me an email if you'd like the slides right away, and please share this information with your colleagues in other districts and non-public and private schools. Hope you have a good rest of your Tuesday. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.